So, good morning and welcome to what I think is the fourth, maybe even fifth of our series of bite-sized breakfast briefings from the team here at SustainIt. So if this is your first time, these are short webinars. We definitely won't go over half an hour. At a high level, looking at some of the subjects that are affecting sustainability at the moment. So without further ado, let's move forward. So first of all, we'll do some very quick introductions. So my name is Joe Jones. I've worked at SustainIt for nearly 6 years now. Actually, you might be coming up on 7. No, 6. And I am Principal Sustainability Consultant at the team. I've been very lucky in that I've worked on quite a lot of sustainability projects, especially looking at greenhouse gas emissions and how you can manage those very effectively. The other person on the call with me is Matt. Say hello, Matt.
Good morning. Yes, I am Matt Whitney. So I've been with SustainIt for just shy of a year, and I lead on developing new business. I'm not.
Ignore me then. Keep going.
So I'm sorry, I'm Matt. I've worked with SustainIt for nearly 12 months, and I lead on developing new business within the UK and Europe. I also help some of our key clients to get the most from their sustainability data collection and reporting processes. That's me.
Yep. So today we're going to talk about the recently released GHG protocol Scope 2 emission guidance from WRI, which even that doesn't roll off the tongue. But we'll talk about what they're doing, what they're trying to do, and how that's going to affect what you're doing in terms of how you're collecting data, how you're reporting emissions, and how you can adjust the KPIs that you've got in place already to accommodate those changes.
So, as Joe just mentioned, the WRI have recently issued some guidance around GHG Scope 2 emissions reporting. Essentially, they've produced an 85-page document that takes some serious digestion and is written, as these things often are, with a policymaker's tone of voice. And if we're honest, with apparently little consideration given to how real people might interact with the document. This morning we are going to try and make some sense of it, and we're going to try to relate it to the sustainability reporting manager's point of view or the environmental manager's point of view. We will also, for what it's worth, and if you'll indulge us, give you our opinion on the purpose and the importance of this guidance, as well as the possible effects that it might have. So, as you all know, Scope 2 emissions are primarily GHG emissions from purchased electricity. They also include GHG emissions from purchased steam, heating and cooling. There are a number of methods to reduce these emissions at the disposal of the modern corporation. First is energy conservation. The second is efficiency upgrades. And the third is low carbon energy procurement. Essentially, you can try and use less energy. You can buy some fancy new kit to enable you to use less energy, or you can buy better energy, or greener energy. This guidance is essentially concerned with the last of these three options, as reduction in emissions from this method have historically been inconsistently reported and therefore not adequately recognised through the GHG protocol.
Yeah, and if I can come in here, I think what I find really interesting about this guidance is that, and I think you'll see it as we go through and we talk a little bit more about what it means, is that it's trying to crack a nut that WRI have pretty much left alone up to now, and that's trying to find a mechanism for organizations who report using the GHG protocol framework, so using the guidance given by WRI, to highlight the work they're doing to find better sources of electricity. Up till now, the guidance from WRI has been really clear, really concise, and really easy to use, in that you report on your CO2 emissions for electricity based on the emission factor of that country. End of. Nice, simple, concise. But that doesn't have a lot of nuance to it. And as companies have changed how they source their electricity, I think WRI haven't really shifted in line with that change. I think one of the big things that this guidance is doing is trying to realign what they're saying you should be doing with actually what a lot of energy managers and environmental managers, sustainability managers are already putting into place. And that's looking for a better way to source low carbon energy, which is great. I have as well got something else which I should have mentioned at the start to talk about, which is there is time at the end of this webinar for questions. And I should have said at the top, so my apologies. We have got in your GoToMeeting window a little chat function. If you'd like to ask any questions in there, and we will get to them at the end, we promise. Thank you for that. Back to the webinar.
So, Scope 2 guidance deals with changes to reporting emissions around low carbon energy procurement. When a company tries to buy better energy, as we termed it earlier, there are broadly 3 different methods by which low carbon energy can be delivered. You can work with your supplier, or indeed choose a new supplier, to purchase a specific low carbon product. You can enter into power purchase agreements with individual generators to purchase the specific energy that they are generating within their facility. Or you can purchase what are known as certificates, things like RECs, ROCs, GOs. You might have heard them termed as such. These are all these 3 are obviously good ways to reduce the carbon content of the energy that you purchase. Now, within this guidance, any of these are considered contractual instruments. This guidance deals with a lot of terms that may not be commonplace speak for a lot of people, so it's important to understand what a contractual instrument is. Another way of defining a contractual instrument, as I understand it, is as any type of contract between 2 parties for the sale and purchase of energy that is bundled with attributes about the energy generation. Essentially, if the supplier can give you any more detail than this is simply grid electricity, then it can and should be considered as a contractual instrument.
Yeah, I think just to jump in again quickly, I think Matt kind of puts it very nicely there, and it isn't clear throughout the WRI guidance, WI is something different, that exactly what a contractual instrument is, and it's only once you get to the heart of that that things start to coalesce. I think it's one of those occasions where there's a terminology in place that has been is a little obstructive to understanding of the overall guidance. I think Matt's absolutely right. A contractual instrument is basically any time you've got a bit more information than rather just this is simply grid, and that's a really important thing to remember as you move forward. So back to you, Matt.
So we'll look at what changes does this guidance actually introduce. This guidance is split into 3 main parts. The first part is reporting requirements, and that's what we're going to focus on this morning. What changes to the way you report are now required following the release of this guidance. It also deals with quality criteria. What features and standards does the contractual instrument need to meet in order to comply? We won't go into this level of detail in this session, as our intention is for these to remain bite-sized as per the name. And finally, the guidance deals with recommendations or other features about the contractual instruments that companies could or should disclose. So, what requirements does this guidance introduce? The central theme is this. Bear with me here, as this is the official terminology, so a bit dense. Any company with an operation in markets which provide product or supplier-specific data in the form of contractual instruments must report Scope 2 emissions according to both the supplier-based and the market-based method. That's a bit of a mouthful. What that means, essentially, is that if you use a contractual instrument, If you purchase any of your energy other than simply normal, shall we call it, grid electricity, you must report based on that instrument as well as based on the standard location-based emission factor that you will already have been using. So the location-based approach is the standard geographical conversion factors. For instance, UK has a different conversion factor to France. You all know this due to the differences in methods of power generation in those countries. The market-based approach. Now, this is the new bit. The market-based approach is a standardisation of the different ways that companies were previously reporting on the emissions from any contractual instruments. Before, I understand that many different companies were treating the contractual instruments and the emissions related to them in many different ways. If you buy a contractual instrument that meets the criteria outlined in this guidance, you will be given or you will have access to an emission factor to use associated with that specific contractual instrument. And this method of reporting must be used as well as the location-based method. So what this is saying is you've got to now provide two numbers in your reporting. You've got to give what the number would be for your emissions if it was only based on where you live and the grid electricity where you live, where the site is, and based on the emission factor or the conversion factor relative to that contractual instrument. Important to note that you do then retain the option of which figure of these two to use for your benchmarking purposes. So you need to provide both figures, but you still have the choice as to which one you use for benchmarking. To give you a brief example, because that's a lot to take in possibly. SustainIt, let's say SustainIt purchase our electricity from EDF. Let's say we purchase what could be considered a standard product and not a contractual instrument. If this is the case, we have no specific conversion factor at our disposal except the standard geographical one. And indeed, the electricity tariff that we buy doesn't meet the criteria laid out in this guidance to be considered a contractual instrument. Therefore, we only need report, and we only can report, based on the location method, the standard geographical emission factor. However, if we were to start to purchase our electricity from, I don't know if any of you guys listening today are from outside the UK, but we have companies here called Ecotricity or Good Energy, who essentially provide a green tariff electricity. If we purchase our electricity from either of those, we will be provided with the attributes of the specific makeup of electricity that they provide. That would make their provision of electricity to us a contractual instrument, and therefore we will be obliged to report using the location-based and the market-based method. Two figures using two different conversion factors. I don't know if that was clear, so Joe, do you want to try and clarify what I've just said?
No, I think really this gets to the most important part of it, that this change in the guidance is basically saying that if you use electricity with a different carbon intensity to the country standard, then you now have to report using that emission factor as well. That's the important thing, as well. The guidance is really clear, and it goes to great pains to highlight that you still have to report using your, I suppose for want of a better term, your location or your country, typically, standard emission factor for anything that also wants to use the market-based emission factor. So what it's basically saying is if you've got your own emission factor for a facility or for a site or for anything like that, then great, report on that, but please still report on your standard location-based emission as well, which hopefully makes sense. Now, from my perspective, and I think from our perspective, the big news is that you can now, and I think, you know, I would say finally, you can now bring into your reporting and into your benchmarking the work that your facilities and your FMs and your energy managers are doing with the sourcing of their electricity from less carbon intensive sources. So you can bring that into your overall sustainability reporting. I mean, from my perspective as someone who talks about, you know, data being a driving tool for moving to lower carbon options. I think the great thing from my perspective is that this, in a similar way really to some of the changes that DEFRA brought in recently, encourages organizations to expand their sustainability reporting, and it gives them an opportunity to really gain recognition for the work that they're doing to mitigate or to lower their carbon impact. I think this is a great opportunity for companies who are able to work with less carbon intensive energy providers to highlight the impact that that can have on their overall carbon footprint, and for them to say, look, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, and this is the impact it's having compared to us just going with the standard electricity in these countries. We're making a real change to how we're doing it, and this is how we're doing that, and this is what we want to talk about. So there we go. Back to you, man.
Apologies, I think I was muted then. I was talking away to myself. So we'll deal with the consequences of this guidance. Having to report 2 numbers rather than 1 inevitably means more work for reporting managers. You now have to find 2 emission factors and apply those emission factors to your relative portions of electricity usage. So that is an inevitable consequence of this, and something that if you use a data collection system, hopefully some of that work can be done by the tool, by the software used for this purpose. But there are also significant upshots of the introduction of this guidance. So first of those is it's clear formula for those compiling the figures to show when dealing with the reporting of non-standard electricity purchases. No longer are the people responsible for reporting these factors going to be left scratching their heads going, right, how do we incorporate the fact that we're buying this green tariff, the fact that we're buying certificates from certain energy providers, how do we incorporate that into our reporting? Clarity on that is, I think, to be welcomed. Second, this standardisation will make it easier for internal and external stakeholders to analyse and compare performance of a company or companies over time or against each other. There may be a school of thought about this that rather than making it easier for stakeholders who have, let's say, a less technical understanding of the situation, being given 2 numbers may make it more difficult to compare, because if one doesn't understand what figures one's looking at, suddenly there's 2, which one do we use, which one's important. However, the fact that you're given the opportunity to still choose which figure you're going to use for benchmarking purposes should indeed make it easier for your company to be compared to other companies vis-a-vis your performance of carbon intensity, or your performance in 2014-15 compared to your performance in 2015-16. So hopefully that comparability over time or against each other will be helpful. Both of these will help to provide recognition of the positive energy choices made by your company, and this is what Joe was talking about earlier. Previously, these good intentions, good choices, reduction of carbon intensity by your company, all the things you were doing weren't formally recognised. And an upshot of this is that hopefully it should make it easier to prove to senior management the positive impact that energy choices have on the carbon emissions of your company, and hopefully then improving the likelihood of you getting sign-off, or your energy manager getting sign-off for energy projects that frankly we all already knew were good news. Now it's going to be easier to prove to budget holders and senior managers that indeed they are good news for the company, and can be proved to be so.
Yeah, I think if I jump in again, I think pretty much finally now, but Matt touches on something there that's really important to highlight, because what this change does is it asks you to report both emission sets side by side. So it really does make a great step forward, I think, in encouraging organizations to look at how they source electricity. Because as soon as you start sourcing electricity from somewhere else, as soon as you can start have one of these contractual arrangements in place, your reporting will instantly show this is the change in carbon output because of this decision. So instantly you're starting to show, admittedly it's a carbon ROI, but still I think it's an important one to have. You instantly start to show a carbon ROI in the changes you are making. I know from conversations I've had over the years that it's always a struggle to say, this is the difference that what we've done has. This guidance from WRI actually gives you the chance to highlight that right from the start. And I think because of that, it will give you the impetus to do even more. This gives companies the opportunity to celebrate, I think, the success they've had and to report on a drop of emissions as a result of the hard work they've done. So from my perspective, I think it's really good, really exciting stuff. So if I can obviously highlight that we are now getting towards the end of the presentation and we've got our obligatory, these are some of the clients we've worked with. Obviously, we come at this discussion from a very data-driven background. So we know and we understand how energy data drives forward CO2 and sustainability reporting. And so obviously, if you'd like to talk to us more about that, we'd be happy to do that. But for now, we're going to switch to the question section of here. So we shall have a look and see what questions we've got, and we shall go through some of them. So the first question is, I think, probably one of the simplest ones to answer, I think, Matt, which is, if my company does not buy any green tariff energy or PPAs or anything similar, then in effect, this guidance doesn't impact reporting, i.e. one number would still be fine, and that would be the location-based approach. I can answer that one, or I think Matt can, because it's really simple answer, yes. If you're not using any contractual agreements, then you stick with the location-based approach for GHG protocol, and you are still completely in line with what you need to do. So that's a question, quite a long question, quite a short answer. So I've got another one here, which is, where can you get the information on the make of electricity to enable you to report the market-based approach? Is it on the energy bill? Typically, I believe yes, it is on the energy bill. If there are individual case-by-case differences, then there will obviously be differences, but basically that information will be coming from the energy suppliers. And so if it's not on the bill, you can certainly ask for it, and they may be able to give you something as well. But the bill would certainly be the first place I would look. Matt, you think the same?
Yes, indeed. Those emission factors should be readily available, if not on the bill, from the provider themselves. So if you contact their technical departments, I'm sure they can provide it. This may be a more complicated question when you're dealing with RECs and ROCs and the like. But again, those emission factors will exist and will be held by the people from whom you're getting the contracted instruments. Similarly, power purchase agreements, the generator will necessarily have the conversion factor. And it's worth saying that this guidance is 85 pages, and I said at the start that it's not entirely aimed at your regular user or regular reader. That's because this guidance is also aimed at policymakers and energy providers and energy suppliers. It as much gives them clarity as to how to proceed with these changes as it does give you and I on the reporting side clarity about how to deal with it. So yes, go to your provider and they'll be able to give you the conversion factor.
Okay, Matt, I've got a question here which is for you, because I'm afraid I can't remember reading this in the guidance. Do you know if we need to backdate the data? So for example, if we have been buying green energy since 2012, do we need to go back and report both approaches from 2012 onwards?
That is a very good question, and also one that I'm not going to answer with any confidence. So I will say, following webinar, we will circulate to you all a link to the recording of the webinar, and yeah, I'll follow up with all of you individually probably as well. At that time, I will answer that question for you, because I don't want to say something that's not true now and I'm not 100% sure.
I think the short answer... Sorry, go on, Matt. Yeah, I think the short answer for me is very much, I went through the guidance and obviously read it, but I don't remember there being anything about historic data, unlike the DEFRA guidance, which was really clear on it, which either means they weren't very clear on it or they put nothing in, which is, both of those are not particularly helpful, I realise. We will come back to you on it. Okay, next one is much more fun. Suggestions for headings to use. So for location-based emissions / market-based emissions, neither are especially user-friendly titles. Gross emissions, location-based, yes. Any other suggestions on what you could call them? I think this is an interesting point, because the entire, I remember when Matt and I first started talking about this, and it was the entire titling of location versus market is pretty opaque. It doesn't really tell you, oh, this is what we're talking about. From my perspective, I would always encourage an option with the titling that actually really gets to the heart of actual emissions versus country average. I think something like that really gives you the opportunity to highlight that this is the gap and it's a positive gap. Matt, I don't know if you've got any feeling on that one.
Well, we could be tongue-in-cheek. Earlier I termed it procuring better electricity, so these could be your better CO2 emissions from GHG. I don't know. I think there's room to be creative. There's no stipulation within the guidance as to what you have to call it. So have some fun with it.
Yeah, I hope that helps. I think the only last question I've got here is one which is very simple, which is, what do we use for reporting? I think hopefully what we've talked about today has really kind of coalesced our thinking on this, which is that whilst you've got to have both in the report, in terms of benchmarking, in terms of engagement, and certainly in terms of kind of an internal audience, we would say use the market-based, I need to make sure I'm using the right one, but yeah, use the market-based approach. Use the KPIs that show and demonstrate, I think quite effectively, the hard work you're doing and the positive change in carbon impact because of that. I hope that all makes sense. So that is very much it from me. Matt, have you got any final comments you want to add?
No, just that I hope that you guys have found that at least slightly interesting, if not a bit useful. We're always keen that we definitely keep this session under 30 minutes, and I make it 28.5 minutes. So I will say thanks very much for your interest in the first instance, and I look forward to hopefully talking with you all very soon.
I think from me as well, thank you very much for attending our bite-sized breakfast briefing. I hope it wasn't too painful, even though it is very early in the morning, and certainly I've only had one cup of tea. There will obviously be follow-up. We will, as always, post this onto our YouTube channel, and we'll share that via Twitter and via LinkedIn and via our blog, so please check all of those things to have a look. And if there are any further questions you want, if there are any further discussions you'd like to have, then please don't hesitate to get in touch with anybody here at the team, and I'm sure we would be happy to help. And as you already, I'm sure, know from this, happy to talk quite a lot about pretty much everything. Thank you very much for your time, and have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.